Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're demystifying the incredible mechanics of how a massive democracy actually manages its money, makes its laws, and, most importantly, holds its leaders accountable. If you've ever wondered what really goes on behind the heavy doors of the legislature, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it.
So how does a massive democracy actually manage its money and make its laws? Well, we're going to break down the procedural tools and the constitutional framework that dictate everything, from emergency funding all the way to how a simple proposal becomes the literal law of the land. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the government's bank accounts, drafting laws through Parliament bills, the life of a bill, understanding the annual budget, and finally holding the executive accountable. All right, let's jump in. Starting off with Section 1, the government's bank accounts.
Think of the national finances like a giant household. The primary checking account here is the Consolidated Fund of India, under Article 266(1). It holds all the collected taxes, loans, and income. And here's the real kicker. Not a single rupee can be withdrawn from this without absolute parliamentary approval. This beautifully contrasts with the public accounts, under Article 266(2). Since this account holds trust money, like provident funds, it's entirely at the executive's disposal. No parliamentary green light needed for that one.
And then, of course, we have the emergency jar. This is the Contingency Fund of India, outlined in Article 267(1). It acts as an immediate advance, an imprest, that's kept squarely at the president's disposal. It literally exists just for those sudden, unforeseen expenses that pop up when Parliament isn't in session to approve a withdrawal from that main consolidated fund. Now, what's really wild is how this emergency fund has evolved. Back when Parliament passed the Contingency Fund Act in 1951, the upper limit was set at just 50 crore rupees. Fast forward to 2005, and it gets bumped up to 500 crores. But get this, in 2021, it was dramatically increased to a staggering 30,000 crores. I mean, that really puts the sheer scale of modern governance into perspective, doesn't it?
Moving on to Section 2, drafting laws, specifically Parliament bills.
So a bill is simply the draft of a law, right? It's a proposal. Every single law starts out this way, and they basically fall into four distinct buckets: ordinary bills, money bills, financial bills, and constitutional amendment bills. And as you'll see, each type is governed by its own very strict rules of passage.
What's fascinating here is what actually makes a money bill so incredibly special under Article 110. A bill isn't a money bill just because it involves cash. No. It must exclusively deal with specific matters, like imposing a tax, regulating borrowing, or pulling money from the consolidated fund. And if there's ever a debate about whether it qualifies, the Speaker of the Lok Sabha gets the absolute final say.
Which brings us to Section 3, the life of a bill.
Let's trace the dynamic journey of a standard ordinary bill from a simple proposal to an enacted law. It's a pretty straightforward sequence. First, it gets introduced in either House of Parliament. Second, it has to be passed by a simple majority in both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. And finally, under Article 111, it's presented to the President, who can either declare their assent, withhold it, or actually return the bill to the Houses to be reconsidered.
But wait a minute, what happens if the two houses disagree? What actually breaks the system when the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha just can't see eye to eye on an ordinary bill?
Well, the Constitution actually anticipates this exact problem. Article 108 defines a procedural deadlock. This is triggered if one house outright rejects the bill, if they completely disagree on amendments, or if 6 months lapse with zero action. When this happens, the only way to break the gridlock is for the president to summon a massive joint session of both houses to vote on it together.
Now compare that intense deadlock process to a money bill. With a money bill, the Rajya Sabha has virtually zero veto power. It can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha, and once they pass it, the Rajya Sabha cannot amend it. They can only offer suggestions. And here is the most powerful part. They absolutely must return it within 14 days. If they don't, the bill is deemed to have been passed by both houses anyway. Talk about a ticking clock.
All right, on to Section 4, understanding the annual budget.
Outlined in Article 112 is the Statement of Estimated Receipts and Expenditures. The budget is conceptually divided into two distinct tabs. On one side, we have expenditure, which contains the demand for grants from the ministries. This is managed through the appropriation bill, legally allocating money out of the consolidated fund. On the flip side, you have revenue, which basically answers the question, how on earth do we pay for all this? This contains future tax proposals and is handled by the finance bill, which, by the way, is treated as a money bill.
But here's the thing. Not every single expense is debated and voted on. Article 112(3) outlines what are known as charged expenditures. These are expenses charged directly on the Consolidated Fund that do not require prior approval or voting by Parliament. They're there purely for accounting. We're talking about the salaries of the President, Supreme Court judges, and the Comptroller and Auditor General. It's a brilliant structural design, really, meant to protect the absolute independence of those critical constitutional offices.
And finally, Section 5, holding the executive accountable.
It is vital to contrast these two powerful motions, both of which can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha. First, a censure motion. This targets just one specific policy of the government. If it passes by a simple majority, the government doesn't resign, but that specific policy has to be scrapped. A no-confidence motion, however, that is a direct existential challenge. Introduced by the opposition, if this motion passes by a simple majority, the entire government is expected to resign immediately. The whole shebang.
But obviously, you can't just casually challenge the government's existence whenever you feel like it. Actually introducing a no-confidence motion requires the verified backing of at least 50 members of the House. And this exact same 50-member rule applies to an adjournment motion, which is used to basically hit pause on ongoing discussions to immediately address a matter of urgent public importance.
And to ensure tax money isn't just squandered during the budget process, the opposition has another weapon, the cut motion. They use this to demand a cut to the grants given to specific ministries, acting as a major check on the misuse of public money. And it's a procedural move so severe that if a cut motion is actually passed by a simple majority, it's treated as a loss of confidence, meaning the Council of Ministers must actually resign. So as you process these immense parliamentary powers, from moving 30,000 crore rupees overnight to forcing an entire government to resign over a single budget cut, ask yourself this. In a functional democracy, does the true power lie in the ability to write the laws or in the ruthless procedural control over the government's bank accounts? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the systems around you.